for?
Well, now you have to say okay.
You do too, Mr. O'Leary.
Mr. Chair, all of the members of the task force are here. We are recording and live streaming. You are good to go.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will call the meeting to order then. Declaration of community interest. You can clear anytime you see fit during the meeting. Madam CEO, would you introduce our guests, please?
I'd be pleased to do so. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So joining us this morning are our consultants from SHS. The principal, Ed Starr, is with us. The project manager for the Rockwood Terrace project is Dalton Woodrick. And the project manager for the Grey Gables project is Tristina Sinopoli. Welcome to all of you. And I think we'll turn it over to you, I think, Ed, to get things started this morning. Thanks.
Thanks, Ed. Go ahead, Ed. Welcome. I believe you're muted.
You're on mute, Ed.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a Toronto Maple Leaf joke, but maybe I'll save it for later.
Oh, Brian's been beat up.
No, please.
And would you people just let it go, please? Like, just let it go. Holy mackerel.
Okay, so what we're going to do today is, as Kim said, Dalton has been the lead on the Rockwood Terrace work and Tristina on Grey Gables. So you've heard from us previously about our preliminary findings on Rockwood Terrace. Since that time, primarily what we've been looking at are the financial aspects of the project to work out a financing strategy and just ensure that it's viable and reasonable. So Dalton's going to update just very quickly the work that was done previously, and then focus in a bit on the financial side, and then be available for questions. And then Tristina has got well down the road on the second project for Grey Gables. So she's going to outline the progress we've made to date, some initial thoughts, and then give you the next steps in that process. So we are very close to completion on Rockwood Terrace, and hope to have that all done by the next couple of weeks. And then Tristina's work will be following shortly after that. So if everybody is ready, I could ask Dalton maybe to get into the first presentation on Rockwood Terrace.
Thanks, Ed. Go ahead, Dalton.
Okay. So Heather, are you going to share the slides or should I?
If you can, that would be great. If you can, I'm happy to.
Okay, I will share. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us today. We're looking forward to giving you a bit of an update since the March meeting that we had. I'm going to flip through some fairly really quickly go over the study again, just so that everybody's on the same page, and highlight some of the key findings, and then get into some of the details on what is being proposed for the site and the project costing and funding. So once again, we're looking at Rockwood Terrace and how we develop a 128-bed long-term care facility. There's the 32-acre property just south of the current location, and it's an excellent opportunity to build not just the long-term care facility, but a full campus of care community. So just kind of going over some of those things that we talked about in March. There's a higher proportion of residents over the age of 55 in the community than Ontario in general. The tenure mix, it's only about 24% rental. So there's definitely an opportunity to grow the amount of rental for retiring seniors. And that there aren't a lot of options for sort of an apartment style retirement in the county. So looking at apartments is probably a good way to go. Looking more precisely at the demographics. The clump of bars second from the right is the age 65 to 75, 74. And it's higher than 45 to 54, which is unusual. That normally you start to tail off in population size as people grow older, which means that there's quite a substantial seniors population in the region. So Campus of Care, once again, looks like a great opportunity. This is a rehash of a previous slide. The property is really conveniently located, about a 10-minute walk from downtown Durham. The essence of the rest of the text here is that really need to look at what's going to make people want to live in Durham and Grey County specifically. There's lots of seniors, but what will this campus provide that's going to make it an attractive place for people to retire? In the previous presentation, we gave sort of our range of numbers of units that would be considered. We've now nailed it down to sort of specifics. And there'd be the 128 bed long-term care facility. And we're looking at 40 seniors assisted living units, 15 affordable rental units, and 45 market rental units. This mixed income approach allows some of the revenues from the market rental and assisted living units to help offset the lower revenues in the affordable rental. And it also is a good strategy for obtaining funds from other parties, such as the National Housing Strategy, and bring down the total costs of the project. When we were looking really specifically at what mix of housing and what buildings to construct, here are some of the key things that we found. We looked at the existing Rockwood Terrace building, and was it an appropriate building to try and do a rehabilitation on and a reuse or whatnot? So the architect took a look and is really strongly recommending that demolition of the building is the way to go, and to reuse the land for the campus. It not only is probably the best use of the site, it improves the overall site design. And once we look at the diagram a bit, you'll see how that plays out. The architect also made an effort to keep the site layout such that the existing street grid can be maintained. So we looked at the 32 acres and said, this is the best place for infrastructure and sort of overall continuity of the community. It really simplifies the utilities and infrastructure design. Something that came up really late in the process is a potential consideration for the adjacent aggregate extraction facility. The province is proposing new separation distances from those types of heavy industry. So there needs to be consideration on how far away from the gravel pit the facility can be. Here's the general layout. That overall, we're looking at 3 to 4 story buildings for the apartments and assisted living, and that the affordable and market units would be in a building that's in 3 to 6 stories. So looking at the diagram, running east-west is South Street East, if I remember correctly. And in the street along the bottom is just a continuation of South Street East. The road on the far right side is Rock Street, and then it would be continuing straight down. Building 1 is the long-term care facility, and it would be the first building constructed. We're looking at a 3-story construction for that building. You can see that it has 2 little courtyards in the middle, so you can have a memory care unit that has access to the outside, but in a very controlled manner. Building number 2 going to the north is a village square. It would be where any sort of major facilities, if you have some retail or commercial space, this is where it would be. If there's a pharmacy or a doctor's office, that would be the location. It would be also the primary location that visitors would come and go from. So that would be sort of the first phase of any sort of construction, building the village square and the long-term care facility, so buildings 1 and 2. The campus of care, so that wider offering for seniors, would be in buildings 3, 4, and 5. With building 3 being assisted living units, so 40 units in a 3 or maybe 4-story building, depending on exactly how that shakes out. A shared lobby between the assisted living and the independent living is in building 4. And then the independent living, the market and affordable rental units would be on Rock Street in building number 5. Just to the north of that, you can see that there's the outline of the existing Rockwood Terrace over top of that parking lot. As you can see, that in order to keep the overall campus within the bounds of South Street East and Rock Street, reusing Rockwood Terrace would be key. So that is the general layout. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the pricing and costing, but we can definitely come back to this slide at any time. So in addition to the long-term care beds, there's the 100 units of seniors living proposed. All of them are proposed as 1-bedroom units that there does not appear to be enough demand for 2 bedrooms to really justify it. The pricing for this is challenging to get comparables in a more rural area like Grey County. What we did is we took a look at another successful campus of care facility, Georgian Village over in Simcoe County, and based some of the pricing on their current offerings. The assisted living is at 100% of what their current offering is, which is $4,200 a month. And that's both the residential rental plus all of the services that are being provided. That isn't just the rent. The market independent living is at 50% of their rents, reflecting that the independent living seniors have a lot more options on where they could live. And this is a bit more rural than up in Simcoe County. So we're looking at half of what they're currently charging as the preliminary position for pricing and the pro forma analysis. And that the affordable is at 79% of the median market rent. And that number was very specific so that the project would qualify for the CMHC National Housing Strategy programs and be able to get some good financing good financing rates and some grants. So we'll get into the project cost and funding. The project costing is broken out. The first 3 slides are on the independent living and assisted living, so that campus of care piece. A summary of the long-term care costs come in the slides that follow. Some of the key pro forma assumptions are we're using a base construction cost of $280 per square foot. We're using escalation at 7.5% and a contingency at 5%. These are fairly high numbers. What the construction industry is finding during COVID is that the cost of construction is going up very rapidly and not uniformly. So wood and metal are going differently than concrete, and it is a little unclear of which building materials would be ideal 2, 3, 4 years from now. So we're putting in a fairly substantial escalation de-risking piece.
Dalton, maybe just, I know we talked about this earlier, but maybe just for the benefit of the community, you or Ed could just provide a bit of a definition or distinguish between escalation and contingency, please.
Okay, escalation, or Ed, do you want this one?
Sure. So escalation refers to inflation from the time that we prepared this estimate until the time you would start construction. And then contingency refers to an amount that would be contained in the budget for unforeseen items that might arise during construction. Let's say, they can't get a certain kind of window, so they have to go to something else. And we have a contingency allowance in the event that happens. So as Dalton said, we are seeing fairly strong inflation in construction costs. So we thought we'd be cautious and build in a fairly substantial inflation into these costs, keeping in mind it'll probably be at least a year or longer until this would start construction.
Thanks, Ed.
So
just a comment. So you can see that what we're talking about for the elements over and above the long-term care, you've got the independent living, which are market rental and affordable rental, total capital cost of approximately 25 million. And then the assisted living, which gives you a package of services, 21 million. So we're talking about a total cost in the area of 47 million. That includes HST and escalations and etc. But we think that's a reasonable number to carry.
And just some quick notes on it. So a fairly standard financial presentation. We have soft costs, so consultants, studies, legal pieces, hard costs, your construction, site servicing, appliances, furniture. Of note, we're still refining the fees and permits. The number is going to come down a little bit. No, it's going to go up just a little bit. But it's not an enormous difference. So the final report will have the final numbers. So that was the cost. Now we're looking at where revenue would come from or funds to pay for the project. Fees and charges waived are being shown here. Randy clarified that some of the independent living fees wouldn't be waived to quite the extent that's shown. So that number will be a little bit lower. So the key takeaway here is line 2, which is the amount of equity that the project would have to bring forward, how much cash up front in order to get the project going. And it's totaling 8 million one. So other sources include CMHC funding of just over $1 million. We're assuming that the land is being provided for free. And then the standard PST and GST rebates. So the total project cost for the overall project is 32 million. So that would be the amount that would have to be mortgaged. Then getting into the annual operating costs. Here we've broken it down on the left-hand side, estimated operating revenues from rental income from tenants, laundry, parking, and then a transfer from assisted living to help out the independent living. The operating expenses on the right-hand side are detailed, and it goes from maintenance to heat, electricity, and water, down to the capital replacement reserve, insurance, property taxes, etc. The blue box on the left, where it has the operating summary, are some of the key measures for project viability. Your net operating income is what do you have left after you've paid all of your operating expenses. Your debt service is how much is your mortgage costing you annually. And then debt coverage ratio is an important financial measure. It is how much over and above your debt service do you have as a cash flow. So this needs to be, your net operating profit or loss needs to be positive in order for it to be a viable project. And it is showing that we can, with the rental prices proposed and the construction costs that we presented, we have a viable project here for the unit mix that was presented.
Dalton, can you just remind the committee of your assumption with regard to the mortgage interest rate or the borrowing rate?
I don't have that number
That's
right
an RFIN.
here.
That's an RFIN question.
That was an
I'm
RFIN
sure.
question.
Oh,
Yeah.
I can probably elaborate. We went to Infrastructure Ontario, and
Yes.
they have actually, it breaks down into two. They have a very low interest rate for borrowing money during construction. It's less than 1%. It's the way that Infrastructure Ontario sets out their lending programs. So I think it was like about 0.75, and it's been that way for many years. So to borrow the money we need initially for the construction, it's very inexpensive. But then once the building is complete and they convert that into your long-term mortgage, and I think the current rate they were showing was somewhere around a little over 3%. Again, this has to be monitored and adjusted as we get closer to construction. But I think that's about the rate that we built in. These change constantly depending on changes in lending markets. But Infrastructure Ontario is a very good place to go for part of the funding. That would be the assisted living. For the affordable housing, the CMHC program called Co-Investment Fund. They provide direct loans from CMHC, and again, they're at about 3%. So that would be built in here.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, are you, do you want questions as we go, or do you want us to wait?
Dalton, what do you prefer? You want us to ask questions as we go or at the end of your presentation?
So why don't we do questions now? So the next slides are the financial assessment of the long-term care facility, and then it's Q&A. So,
okay, thanks, Dalton. I cannot see the full committee, but if you have a question, just please speak up. And Scott, go ahead.
It's Brian here, actually, but
Oh, Brian, go ahead.
that's okay. I've been called worse. Dalton, when you talked about the net operating profit or loss, you said we have a viable project here, given those numbers. Can you give me a little bit of relativity, like context? Are we close to the line, or are we well within the range for a viable project? Can you give me a little bit of, like I say, relativity there, please?
Dalton, maybe I could handle this.
sure.
This is a reasonable result. 1.10 debt coverage ratio means you're basically earning a 10% profit on your debt service, which is reasonable, especially given that a lot of the units are affordable housing. CMHC on the affordable housing side will actually approve projects all the way down to 1.00 break even, although we think that's a little thin. So it's reasonable. Now keep in mind this calls for the county to inject about $8 million of your own equity in order to make the numbers work. We've actually engineered the numbers so that we could arrive at the 1.10, which is a goal in these sorts of projects. And so we engineered the number by arriving at a contribution from the county of about 8.1 million. We could have a higher profit if you injected more, but that we don't think that's necessary to make it work.
Okay, thank you.
A question from the chair. Is this assuming that it's fully occupied? Is what you're basing your decision on?
Not entirely. If you see in the left-hand table, halfway down, it says vacancy loss. So we always carry a 3% vacancy loss, which is advised by CMHC in these kinds of projects. We do think there's a considerable demand, and that would be fairly conservative, but we are carrying some vacancy.
Okay, thank you. Does the committee have any other questions?
Councillor O'Leary.
Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if this is for Dalton or Ed, but on the slide where you're showing all the different buildings, on buildings 1, 3, and 4, you're decisive. You said 3 stories, 3 stories, and 1 story, respectively. On buildings 2 and 5, you have 1 to 2 stories, or 5 is 5 to 6 stories. So I'm just wondering how that's working towards the money that you just showed us. Like if we decide to go 2 stories in number 2 and 6 stories in number 5, are you going to come back and say, well, that 32 million is now 36 million? Or so I guess my question is, why are you indecisive on the number of stories with buildings 2 and 5?
So we wouldn't add additional square footage to change the stories. The buildings would go, instead of being wider, they just go taller. So same total amount of construction material. So it wouldn't change the cost substantially. Some of the challenges around the stories is there's fairly substantial elevation changes across the site. And so the architect was going, these are what we think we can do, but to ensure that we get stories matching up between buildings. So building 1 is substantially lower than building 3, and building 5 is slightly higher than building 3 also. So getting those stories to match up may require modifying how they get laid out a little bit, is really what the indecisiveness is around. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Mr. Chair. That's all for now.
Thank you. Does the committee have any other questions?
Councillor Mackey.
Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My question is around the setbacks from the pit and the possible changes that you alluded to. Is that going to have much bearing on our abilities to move forward with this plan, or to increase the site up the road?
I think Randy should take this if he could.
Yeah, thanks through you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the question, Councillor Mackey. The guidelines have just been released, the proposed guidelines from the province, and staff are currently exploring those in further detail. We understand that it's in a comment period right now. The province asked for comments by July 3rd. Staff were actually able to attend a webinar yesterday. So this is hot off the press, so to speak, but we're still reviewing it, and we plan on bringing back a report to Committee of the Whole on June 24th. Worst case scenario at this stage, we're thinking that it may require some further noise dust investigations as part of the compatibility study. So we have asked SHS to do a D6 study. So the current guidelines are D6 series guidelines. We did anticipate any concerns with respect to the D6 level analysis, but the proposed setbacks and area of influence that are being recommended by or proposed by MECP will likely trigger some further investigations that we'll need to do to ensure that any mitigation measures are put in place as part of the final design of the building. So that's something that we're still exploring, though, and we'll have some further information for Committee of the Whole in that report on June 24th.
Thanks, Randy. Scott, you're muted.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, one more question, if I may. And it's just in regards to the parking for the rental units. And I'm just wondering, is it a covered parking or underground parking? Or is it just open air?
All of it is at grade open air as proposed.
Is there any consideration, knowing that we're dealing with seniors, to have a covered area for parking?
Oh, well, I'll maybe comment on that. It may be possible to have a covered area. I would be hesitant to go underground. The latest estimates we get are that underground parking is $60,000 per space. which would be huge for this size of parking area. We've seen above grade parking structures, which are maybe slightly less than underground, but still quite costly and difficult to maintain. Most of the campus of care projects in areas like Grey County are just open air, as you've seen here. We could go back to the architect and see if there's some kind of middle ground that would have some kind of modest covered area, but we're just a little nervous about the cost.
Well, I appreciate that. And after you mentioned 60,000 space, I'm nervous about the cost too. So thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Ed. I wonder, I'm going to ask maybe a ridiculous question, but I'm not even sure who could answer it. I guess I can put the CEO on standby. How does this figures that we're getting here, these estimates, impact the county levy?
I think that we'll have some further follow-up conversation about that, both the phases of this particular development as well as the information that we'll receive on the Grey Gables project. I think there is a lot to consider here.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, Warden Hicks has a question.
Go ahead, Buck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm still kind of reeling with the talk about uncomfortable with the cost. If I do the math properly, it looks like the independent living units are going to be about $576,000 each. And the assisted living units are going to be $541,000 each. So I'm kind of blown away by that. But my real question is, the affordable independent living units, are they built into this cost, or are we going to see something else with respect to that?
They are built into this cost. I will say that it's a little deceiving because we've put in the gross HST, which is almost $5 million between those two buildings, and then if we pull it out again as a contribution because you're entitled to HST rebates, so that sort of inflates the figures a little bit. But we are seeing, I can tell you, we just tendered out a building. It's a little farther north in North Bay, and just came out at 400. This was a 3-story, no underground parking. Very typical kind of affordable housing project. Came out at $425 a square foot. That was our low bid very recently, and we're seeing this in the in this COVID era. There's difficulty getting supplies. Lumber has shot through the roof. So yes, this is a little surprising to us too, but we want to be realistic.
Yeah, I'm kind of blown away. Numbers. Could you tell me that project that you just mentioned, sorry, through you, Mr. Chairman, the project that you just mentioned in the north, what was the sort of average unit cost for comparable purposes?
That one, now keep in mind, it's a transitional housing project, which only has rooms. It does not have full apartments.
Right.
So that our total budget on that's about $9.5 million for 30 rooms plus a common area. So that's about $325,000 per room.
Right. Yeah, it's a big number. I'm looking at,
It is
$5.5 million on average here for these units. Sorry, half of, excuse me, 550,000, excuse me, on average.
Well, the way to look at it, we're looking at 100 units over and above the long-term care, and their total capital cost on the bottom right is 47.5. So that's basically 475 per unit. If you back out the HST, it's 442. So the real cost is about 42 million, excluding the HST, or 420,000 a unit. That's what it costs.
Wow.
If I could, Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
it's as Dalton mentioned, the assisted living and affordable housing, the campus of care aspect of this comes after the long-term care is built because we're trying to reuse that portion of the site. So when it comes to this build, I think SHS has done the best they can to try and provide an accurate set of figures, but we are some distance into the future, right? This can't move forward until after 2025, when the long-term care facility and that center court building have been constructed. So I think that, you know, we hold an idea in our minds of what things are going to cost, but it's very difficult, I think, when we've seen such a rapid change in numbers, to know with enough certainty where we're going to end up. Are things going to swing back the other way once supply chains get settled and things like that, and we get further into the COVID recovery? Or have we simply established a new normal and this is life as we know it going forward?
Yeah.
That's true.
We also, by the way, we factored in the land value as part of the cost, and then we backed it out again as a contribution. But that's also adding, I think, $800,000 to the budget for this part of the project.
Well, if I was a betting person, I certainly would not bet for Toronto Maple Leafs, but if I was a betting person, I would see we're seeing the new norm, and I really don't think it's going to change, but that's my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Does the committee have any other questions?
Councillor Mackey?
Go ahead, Scott. You're muted, Scott. Scott, you're muted.
Can't hear you.
Scott?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. My question is in regards to your experience with Georgian Village in Simcoe County. How similar is this proposed project to what's already established in Simcoe County as far as the different array of living arrangements?
This is quite similar. They have assisted living units. They have independent, both affordable and market rental, and they have long-term care, and it's all joined by a village square that has the kind of amenities that Dalton was mentioning. The one thing they did do originally, they also were trying to sell life lease units, but they weren't that popular, so they converted them to market rentals. But this does give you a very similar array and generally the similar unit counts. They didn't go huge. I mean, their numbers of units for the independent living and assisted living were fairly similar to what we're suggesting here. And they have they have surface parking as we're showing too.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ed. Does the committee have any other questions at this time? Since I can't see everybody, Madam Clerk, is there any other questions you can see?
I don't see any other hands up, sir.
Okay, thank you. Dalton, you want to proceed with the rest of your presentation?
Certainly. Let's go back to where were we? Okay, so we were just summarizing the operating and expenses for operating costs and revenues for the campus. So next are the long-term care numbers. So the same analysis, the soft costs, hard costs, and contributions for the 128-bed long-term care facility. The base construction cost is a little bit higher at $325 a square foot. There's a higher standard for the construction, and it results in some higher costs. So for the 128 beds, the total project cost, less the contributions, is just shy of $42 million. And on the operating side, skipping down to the bottom line, the lenders require a debt coverage ratio of 1.3 instead of 1.1 for long-term care facilities. The financial institutions are treating them just a little bit higher risk. So with, once again, the provincially mandated revenue capabilities and the costs of construction, there's definitely a viable project here.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I do want to provide a little bit of note of caution or background here. Certainly, SHS has provided us numbers based on their experience with other projects. I think Grey County's structure and costs are not identical to what's being shown here. And so we will have an opportunity either now or later this morning to take a look at the Grey County specific numbers by way of comparison. But I think it's important that you know that SHS has done their best to represent these. It's just that our own information is a little bit different.
Thank you, Kim, for that. And that's valuable information to have.
Mr. Chair, I do see Councillor Mackey's hand.
Okay, go ahead, Scott.
No, I just hadn't lowered it. Sorry, Mr. Chair. Sorry, Heather.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, Dalton, go ahead.
All right, Dalton. Dalton, could you maybe go back one slide to concentrate a little further on the project costs? We just wanted to show that part of this, if you look under the hard costs, we're incorporating the village square, which isn't strictly beds. This is more of the amenity and commercial area, so that adds into the cost. We estimated at 7.6, and then on the right-hand side, you'll see that in terms of contributions, about halfway down, you'll see LTC funding streams. The Ministry of Long-Term Care has changed their formula so that there is a larger grant portion that they will be contributing to the project. And our estimate, subject to Kim's comments, would be that the county would be looking at about $5 million equity contribution in order to make the numbers work at a 1.30 debt coverage ratio. But again, this is Kim will be going over that carefully in relation to your own costs.
Thanks, Ed.
And that is basically the end of the presentation. So next steps is delivering the final report. The rest of the slides just show the long-term care and the campus all together in a financial presentation.
Okay, thank you, Dalton. Does the committee have any other questions at this time? And Madam Clerk, I cannot see everybody.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you. In relation, I noticed in the last piece, the long-term care, you had put $250,000 for demolition of the current building. Is there any assumptions around that any of the rubble or materials from that building can be reused on this site, or no? Or is it entirely take it down and remove it from the site?
That would be you want
Go
that one,
ahead.
Ed?
Oh, no, you go ahead.
That would be decided at the time of construction, whether we can reuse some of the material as either fill or building materials. We just put in at this time, we don't know exactly how that would shake out. We put in basically a contingency. We know that we need to do demolition, and this is the price that it's at.
Right. I'm just thinking, given the level
Yeah,
of
sure.
expenses for the rest of the facility or the new facility, I'm thinking 250,000 might be a little bit light to take the old one down, but that I'm just guessing. You guys will know that a lot better than I will. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Does the committee have any other questions at this time?
I don't see any other hands, Mr. Chair.
So, gentlemen, are we going to proceed with our next part and go to Grey Gables? Or what do you prefer to do there? Guess I'm asking where we're at.
That was the plan, Mr. Chair, would be that that Tristina could now present the work that's been done towards the Grey Gables project.
Thank you. Go ahead, Tristina.
Great, thank you all. It's so lovely to meet you. I'm just going to pull up my slides here so that you can all see them. So hi, everybody. My name is Tristina Sinopoli. I'm a development manager with SHS Consulting. And I'm really excited to present to you kind of our phase 1 findings for the market assessment for Grey Gables. Oops. So in terms of our presentation today, it's going to be very similar to the kind of the structure and overview that you received in March as it pertained to Rockwood Terrace. We'll provide kind of an overview of the study, the market analysis, the opportunity as we see it, as well as the options and evaluation criteria that we'll be looking at moving forward as we move forward into phase 2. So in terms of the purpose of the work, the real goal today and throughout this process is to understand the feasibility of building a campus of care community as it pertains to the Grey Gables long-term care home facility. And the goal here is to really look at ways to adapt the building in a way that's conducive to creating a campus of care. I haven't included any campus of care definitions. I know that the committee is now very well versed in the structure and understanding. I know that Dalton provided a wonderful presentation in March, but of course we can always talk through any questions that there might be around definitions. So in terms of the methodology for our study, we began by looking at a market and demand analysis, really kind of understanding who is in the community and what are the kind of availability of housing opportunities on the supply side that might be able to support them. This was augmented through our background research and literature review on kind of similar models and case studies that we might look at going forward. And really the heart of phase 1 was doing preliminary engagement through key informant interviews, as well as focus groups with the Grey Gables long-term care staff, as well as an intimate conversation with the Council on Aging, Grey Bruce. And this really got us to where we are today, and I'm really excited to kind of walk you through what our findings look like. So from a market analysis perspective, I'm sure that this won't be news to folks around the table. In terms of the local and demographic trends, the many stakeholders described the trends in Grey County as really being a tsunami of aging needs. We can kind of see the future. We can see that through the demographic of individuals that are 45 to 55, as well as 55 to 64, that we can really anticipate a growing need for a variety of housing sources that will help individuals as they're aging. So from a needs perspective, it's very clear that the demographic is lining up and that there is a growing group of seniors that are requiring housing supports. In addition to this, there's also another story emerging, and this is as it pertains to really the growth of Grey County as a whole, and in particular, some of the employment nodes in Grey Highlands. Throughout our interviews and our engagement process, it was identified from stakeholders that Markdale and Grey Highlands in particular have really strong employment nodes. That includes the Markdale Hospital, as well as Chapman's Ice Cream and Ice River Springs Water Company. And it was expressed to us that there's really a desire to make sure that as we're thinking about seniors, we're also thinking about what are the mechanisms that are attracting and retaining talent in young families. And there's really an opportunity to think about childcare, to think about an intergenerational suite of services and tools that would actually kind of leverage the existing momentum within the employment sector in Grey Highlands, while also making sure that we're creating a meaningful connection to Grey Gables because there's an existing childcare facility on site. So this just gives us kind of an open door into thinking about what might be the opportunity to think about childcare in addition to the campus of care model, and especially given the proximity to the hospital. So I think that's a kind of a really interesting trend that was shared by several stakeholders really across a variety of sectors. When it comes to the housing need was very clearly articulated to us, and this is very similar to the findings from Walkward. There is a need for more affordable housing. There is a need for more housing that is dynamic, that has a variety of kind of housing options. And we can kind of see that both through the core housing need experienced by seniors kind of throughout the county in particular. When it comes to the supply of housing, it's very clear that throughout the county that there is a focus on ownership, understandably, just given the nature of the housing stock that exists there, that there has not been a kind of an increased focus on rental housing. And that really kind of creates this gap that we're seeing from seniors about really trying to understand once they exit homeownership and want to kind of downsize in a way, but there are very limited kind of rental options that would be able to be conducive to making that shift. And this is really consistent with the data that your team has in terms of what the private market housing landscape looks like in Grey County. The other supply analysis that we looked at was what are the existing facilities for long-term care, assisted living, independent living, as well as affordable housing. And so here you can just see kind of the map that exists. I think the key takeaway here is that many of the facilities that are existing today are still single purpose. There's still a single long-term care facility or a single assisted living facility. We are seeing some trends moving towards the campus of care. So the Village Long-Term Care by Rivera is an example of that. But stakeholders really expressed that need to have something that's much more of a continuum that wasn't an either or decision. And that somebody could kind of grow into as they were within one campus or one community. So I think that's the key takeaway here, is that amongst the existing supply that supports seniors, they're all single purpose, and there's an opportunity to think about being more multi-purpose. On the affordable rental side, we did do a scan of both the nonprofit providers as well as the housing that's provided directly through Grey County. The key takeaway here as it pertains to seniors affordable housing is that the majority of nonprofit seniors housing providers that offer housing are not located in Grey Highlands. A lot of them are really in Owen Sound and a little bit more north. So there's really no critical mass of nonprofit seniors affordable housing providers that are developing seniors housing in Markdale in Grey Highlands. That's really not the narrative. All of the seniors housing that's located in Grey Highlands and in Markdale is owned and operated by the county. And all of the nonprofits are really kind of farther away from that. And so in terms of the kind of a summary of the housing needs that were identified by stakeholders, these are the 4 large key takeaways. And I'm going to walk through each one of these because I think this really gets to kind of the heart of some of the directions that we'll be talking about in a little bit when we talk about the opportunity. The first is there was a resounded desire amongst folks to really understand that there's a desire in the community for seniors to remain after they either sell their property or are looking to downsize. A lot of folks expressed concern with having to move to another city that had more suitable housing for them, or move to another city to be closer to family because they didn't have a housing option that would be able to support them in the way that their family might be able to. And so there's a strong desire for seniors to stay in Markdale, to stay in Grey Highlands, and an openness to then finding housing that would be suitable for them. So from a market need perspective, there's definitely that need there. And there would be an opportunity to make sure that this housing aligns with that need. The second key insight that we heard was as it pertains to spouses and how it pertains to the need to think about a diversity of varying care needs. And what this might mean is a couple might have kind of varying care needs in the sense that one of the partners may require long-term care while the other partner may require independent living. And the kind of concern of having to live so far apart and so separately and how challenging that can be for couples. So there is an opportunity to think about a campus of care as it pertains to supporting spouses that have these varying care needs that can still live within a community together and still replicate the life that they have together while not feeling like they're living in disparate buildings or disparate communities or really living far apart. So there's an opportunity there. The next key opportunity is around ambulatory care discharge. And this was something that was expressed throughout our conversations, in particular with the Markdale Hospital as well. It's about thinking about opportunities for seniors who are doing a day away surgery or who need kind of some support as they're being discharged from the hospital to be able to have some type of opportunity to have some kind of interim care, interim support that can support them. And this dovetails with the other point here around respite care. So the opportunity to have something that's more short-term in nature and that is really just responsive to maybe a particular incident or particular crisis that somebody might be experiencing where they can't live at their existing property but need to spend a week or a few days or overnight in a respite facility to support their care needs. So that's an opportunity to think about as well. We also heard the need for just more respite and motel space for visiting families who are visiting the long-term care. So when it comes to kind of a flexible, rentable, by the night or by the week type space, there could be kind of two users, both the respite care for seniors as well as families who might be visiting. And that just really helps the business model overall. So that's a quick summary of the needs that were really identified by stakeholders and really articulated to us throughout the process. And that really feeds into the market opportunity that we'll present today. And I think that the way to sum it up, and I think this was a wonderful quote that was shared to us by one of the stakeholder interviewees, is in the past, the sector was so focused on lengthening life that we didn't really focus enough on quality of life. And that's really, I think, a strong statement that was shared really by a variety of stakeholders who really just articulated that focus on holistic care, about thinking about all of the needs of seniors, their mental well-being, their physical well-being, and then their emotional and community needs as well. And so I think that that's just a really great quote to just ground what the market opportunity might look like. And so what might this look like? What might this look like in a physical space, and how might this actually manifest? And I'll kind of highlight here kind of three ways that we see this manifesting. The first is through a campus of care. And so really creating a variety of housing sources and options that are located on site that create that continuum of housing care and housing options for folks. The second is around a mixed income model. So thinking about ways to cross-subsidize units so that there is an opportunity to serve a variety of seniors who might have a variety of affordability and housing needs. And the third key piece here, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, is the opportunity to think about intergenerational connections. The Grey Gables site currently is home to Kids and Us, which is a child care provider. They also operate an early on center on the site. They are currently looking at other space on an upcoming redevelopment as well. So there might be an opportunity for them to still retain some space here or look for another potential operator that could support the existing child care that's there. One of the kind of key insights that came out of our findings for childcare was that there's really a desire to create more 24/7 childcare, a childcare that would support shift workers that are both in healthcare as well as shift workers that are in the manufacturing field. So there could be an opportunity now to kind of rethink what that childcare on the site looks like and how that is supporting all of the nearby institutions that would be able to make use of that, and then ideally help to support revenues for the project as a whole. When it comes to the project features and amenities, we spent quite a bit of time working with stakeholders to really understand what would be the ideal suite of amenities that would really meet their definition of quality housing, because that was really the focus that they wanted to see. And so beginning with the housing continuum, that was definitely highlighted, of course, as a key project feature. Some of the other pieces here, I'll kind of walk through at a high level. There was a desire to create more spaces that were conducive to kind of hands-on activities. So things like arts and crafts spaces, as well as green space. There's an existing community garden on the site that is beloved by residents and by community members. And so there's an opportunity to kind of amplify that and create more green spaces, more community garden spaces that would support that as well. There was a desire to see more gathering spaces and kind of space where family members could congregate with their families as well as kind of residents on the site. And then in addition to that, there was a desire for things like wellness and personal care, really things that would kind of really speak to kind of the mental health and well-being of folks that were living on the site. I won't speak to childcare again. I kind of walked through that in a little bit prior to this. And then on the retail side, there is an opportunity to think about a cafe or a small scale pharmacy or some type of small space that would create a kind of more cohesion amongst the existing tenants on the site. It was shared with us that the Tim Hortons across the street is incredibly inaccessible. It's challenging both for the existing employees of the long-term care facility as well as some of the other tenants on the site to really kind of make the most use of their lunch hour or their breaks, to have to really struggle to get across. And so there is an opportunity to think about what might retail space on this site look like and how might that best serve the needs of everybody that might be living and working there. Throughout our process, we also tried to get an understanding of what were the goals and values of stakeholders across the table, so we could see where there might be alignment, where there might be ways to really think about the opportunity in a way that reflects the goals and values of the community. The first that we heard was that there's a desire to create cohesion with the new hospital as well as local social service partners, and we'll continue those conversations into phase 2. The second that we heard was that there's a goal to enable seniors to stay in their community, and I've spoken to that a little bit before. We also heard that the building is beloved. It's really tied to the identity of Markdale, and there's a desire to honor the importance of that existing building and its character, and then that should be considered as we're considering the options that might repurpose the building as a whole. And then in addition to that, several of the key tenants on the site expressed a desire to maintain their footprint. And so we'll still continue to have conversations with those key tenants about what that might look like. We still have to have a conversation with GREAC Services to really understand what their space needs are. And so that will be included in our phase 2. The other kind of key things here that were identified was really kind of goals and values as they relate to green space. So the walking paths and the balconies that exist on the facility now, there's an opportunity to amplify that. And then tying this all together within Markdale as a whole, there really is an opportunity to align the potential redevelopment of the site with the vision for downtown Markdale as a whole, and kind of creating this kind of prominent center and really creating something that the Markdale community feels a lot of joy and pride in when they see this kind of what this new redevelopment might look like. So this is just a summary of those goals and values, and it's just really important that we keep those in mind as we're exploring what these options might look like and kind of moving forward for the evaluation criteria. So I'll give you just an overview of what our phase 2 is going to look like. We're going to be looking at 2 potential redevelopment options. This is going to be a little bit different from Rockwood Terrace in the sense that we'll be presenting you 2 concept plans that kind of reimagine the space. The first will focus on assisted and independent living, so a little bit similar to the presentation today. And the second will have a little bit more of a focus on respite care, kind of more short-term needs and supporting seniors in that way. And so we'll be bringing those options and those concept plan forward to you, as well as all of their financial models, to begin to just understand what might be the recommended approach or a combination thereof. That is certainly on the table as well. But these are the 2 options that we're going to be looking at going forward into phase 2. In terms of the evaluation criteria that we'll be looking at, because we'll be thinking about how do each of these options meet the goals and the values that were expressed throughout this process, as well as the goals and values and expectations of Grey County. So the first is we'll be looking at value for money and financial feasibility, really making sure that we have an understanding of how each of the options really does provide value for money and can provide us with a gauge of what is more financially feasible and kind of appetizable from the sense of Grey County. The second is what is the opportunity for each option to provide a continuum of housing supports, which one really does that best. How are we maximizing uses within site constraints? So we understand that the site space is limited. We have an existing building that we're working within. So which option really does maximize that space and really serve the most people or meet the most need? And then in addition to that, how are we supporting the existing tenants on site and really maintaining their space that exists? So those are the kind of 4 questions that we'll be asking ourselves as we look at the 2 options that I just shared with you. So looking ahead, this is what phase 2 will look like for us. We'll be conducting an existing building assessment of the facility to really understand from a physical and structural perspective, what are things that we should know when we're contemplating the repurposing of that space. Salter Pilon will be providing high-level concept plans for each option. We'll be looking at what might be the planning approvals approach, as well as what might be comparable projects that we can point to. And then, of course, we'll have a deep understanding, similar to today, of what the financial model looks like and what are some of the partners or services that we might see at the table as well to support that campus of care. So I think that's all on my end. I will certainly open it up to questions and kind of hear from the task force as well.
Thank you, Justina. A great presentation. Does the committee have any questions at this time? Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Christina, for your presentation. You spoke of ambulatory care. Do you have any sense on what the need is in Grey County for ambulatory care? I can, certainly say from a personal experience over the last, 3 months, it's really not available. And my understanding is that there is some potential LIN funding available for ambulatory care that nobody really wants to speak about. So I'm just wondering if you could enlighten the committee on that, please. Thanks.
Sure. And so in this phase one, we heard the need for that. So similar to as you just shared, that there's a need for ambulatory care. Phase two will really help us dive into, well, what's the feasibility of that? What are the funding sources available for that? And what might a potential partnership with the hospital look like? So we've already had a preliminary conversation, but the next step will be for us to sit down with them and really think about how might the two sites work together and what might that linkage be. So that's going to be key for us in phase two. This was really, phase one was really an exercise to say, within the realm of all of the needs that are out there, where should we really be going deep on? And we heard the need to go deep on ambulatory care and really understanding this. And so phase two will be that opportunity to really, exactly as you said, for understanding the LIN funding. Is it available? Is it accessible? What are the pitfalls that Grey County should be aware about if you decide to go down that pathway, for example?
Okay. Scott, was that all your questions or?
I had one other question on a different note. Christina, you talked about current tenants, and no disrespect to a current tenant that may be with us today, but are you going to look at the overall picture of Grey Gables and how it would be best served as in redevelopment, even if it meant some current tenants no longer are there?
I think so. It was expressed to us that the tenants had a desire to stay, and so the municipality of Grey Highlands, for example, has actually recently expanded some of its space within the facility. It's taken on some of the additional office spaces that were located there, and so I think that I don't think there is another space that's available that would be suitable for Grey Highlands. So I think that they would be considered a tenant that we would kind of be solving for in this. But you do open up a good question, Scott. When we're talking about the existing tenants that are there, we're really looking at kind of the lower level as well as the childcare space. And this poses a question about within the repurposing of the site, there might be other wings that are more conducive to another type of tenant, like a retail tenant, for example, that I walked through. And so that's going to be the focus that we take. I think we followed the leads of the tenants to say, what are your space needs? Is the space adequate for you? Do you see yourself in the potential redevelopment? And so far we've heard yes. Of course, we still have to have the conversation with Grey Ag, but that's the approach that we took, or what were the space needs of the tenants. But I would welcome feedback or comments or directions that you might want us to take or just look at a little bit more deeply.
So, Mr. Chair, personally, I would certainly like to see what that space could be utilized for the benefit of seniors if we're looking at a campus of care. Certainly our tenants now, we may wish to keep them, but I would like to see the financial projections of one, keeping our tenants, or looking at it being repurposed for senior care. Thank you.
Perfect.
Good
And that would be.
Go ahead.
I might just add that will be a part of the financial analysis, looking at what are all of the revenue sources. So in addition to their leases and those revenues, and what might be an alternative revenue source. So we can provide that comparison to you, certainly, so you have that information.
Thank you. I was wondering if the tenant had any comment on those comments.
Yes, I would say that certainly for the short term, we don't have any plans of leaving, especially after what was mentioned, how we have expanded, our space, and that sort of has satisfied. Well, we haven't really used it very much in the last 14 months because of why, of COVID, right? But certainly once we get back into the full swing of things, it's certainly going to be a compliment for us because the new space that we acquired, we certainly have changed things around in our office with regards. That's a full financial area of our municipal business. So that's sort of a separate spot that has certainly allowed, to maybe properly, adequately put our staff in certain locations. So, but certainly, I would say probably from my opinion, at least for the next 4 to 5 years, I think that we would be looking at staying in that space. There's no indication or no discussion of moving out of that space. I mean, we are doing a visionary process of our downtown Markdale and looking at how we redevelop, the downtown Markdale, and it is part of that. Looking at municipal office is very, very high level, very, very high level at this point. So, to answer your question, Mr. Chair, right now I don't see us have the desire of leaving. We really like to, being there. It's worked very well for the last 20 years, and so far I don't think we've been too bad of a tenant for the county. We always pay our bill. So anyway, I don't know if there's any questions from that or anything from that, Mr. Chair, but certainly a positive. We had a very positive experience being there for sure.
No, it's great to have a happy tenant because it makes it easier putting up your rent.
Well, yes, I know we want to pay fairly and for sure, and but it has worked very well for the last 20 years. I know other municipalities at the time of amalgamation made a decision to build their own building, and that's been. But you know what? That's 20 years ago. It's hard to believe how time flies, right? So it is what it is, and but yeah, it's worked. The space has worked very well, and continues to work very well.
Thank you, Paul. Does the committee have any other questions? Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tristina, did I understand that you talked to staff as a stakeholder group? And I'm wondering, did their needs or wishes align at all with the tenants in your discussions with them of what they may see, in the future?
Sure. And so I did speak with staff. So we did do a focus group. The focus of the conversation with staff was really to understand the needs that they're seeing from seniors and that they're serving, and really understanding what might be some of the options that they would really ideally like to see as it pertains to housing. We didn't have a conversation about their perspective on the mix of tenants that should be in the actual building facility, other than the project amenities that might exist. So we spoke about the need for more wellness spaces that could support both staff, whether it's staff for the long-term care facility or staff that are employed by the municipality or other tenants. So we talked about what are some of the shared spaces that would be utilized. And so retail certainly came up, the need for a cafe or pharmacy. That was really articulated. We didn't necessarily have a conversation about the trade-off of space. That's really going to be, I think, the heart of phase 2, is now that we know the mix of what's available, what does the building really allow for? And if it's a trade-off between a wellness space or a retail space, how do folks feel about that, or what direction should we take? Or if there's a trade-off between an existing tenant and their need for a certain building size or building or space footprint size, then we would have that conversation. But we didn't have that conversation with staff. It was really, what are the suite of amenities that would best serve you, that would best serve the seniors that you're serving, and kind of create a community. So I don't think that there was a perspective on who should or shouldn't be in the building, but the opportunity of what spaces should be in the building.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And I do think it's important that, the shared spaces need to be positive spaces for both tenant and staff, because if staff are feeling very positive about their workspace, it just makes the workspace a very positive place, if that makes sense. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Basically, good comments. Mr. Worden, I seen your hand was up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Christina, I wonder if we might go back to slides 8 and 9 in the market analysis.
Sure, one second.
And I'm just wondering, what are we supposed to take from that? I don't think that I quite caught in your presentation what we were supposed to take from that.
Sure. So I'm on slide 8 here. And
Yes.
so the takeaway here is that, so in this particular case, core housing need is a statistic that is gathered by CMHC and calculated by CMHC. Based on their availability of data, they don't always have all of the municipalities carved out in their data sets. And so for Grey County, the focus areas that they include are Owen Sound as well as West Grey. And so this is to show that that there are kind of 2 data sets within the county that indicate that seniors are experiencing core housing need, and core housing need is defined as spending above and beyond 30% of their income on housing, or not living in housing that is adequate or quality to their needs. So they're living in an inadequate situation, require better housing. And so what this slide articulates is that if we look at the age groups and demographics, that both owners as well as renters are experiencing a core housing need in the higher age brackets, and we see that in both Owen Sound and West Grey. So this just illustrates that across age brackets, there's a skew towards seniors who are experiencing core housing needs. So again, spending in excess of 30% of their income on housing or not living in adequate housing facilities. Does that answer your question for this slide?
It does. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I might?
Go ahead.
Thank you. One of my concerns here is space. A lot of great ideas, but I'm really concerned about, do we have sufficient space to do all of the things that we appear to be wanting to do here? And I suppose we're already beginning to have that discussion. The one aspect that I've been plugging out since the beginning of time, it seems, is dementia and dementia care. And I've always had this kind of fantasy, I guess, that Grey Gables could be, the existing Grey Gables facility might present a great opportunity for us to think about dementia memory care. Why? Because we don't have the same sort of need for those pods being set up in the way that the modern story tells us we should be setting it up in. So probably with very little change to the physical space, we could probably be looking at dementia care in the existing facilities. So I just keep coming back to that. I want to keep driving that, because if we're talking about a tsunami, the tsunami we're being told is around dementia. So I want to make sure that we keep our eye on that ball. And we may have to, given the space, we may have to carefully consider our options, and take a hard look at compatibility, existing uses versus if we're saying we want campus of care, we may have to say, look, the priority is going to be focusing on seniors and compatible uses and needs for seniors. So those are my comments for now.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Any response to that, Christina?
Sure. So I might add that on the memory care side, and I apologize, I should have covered this a little bit in the presentation. There is certainly an opportunity to think about memory care units or memory care beds that might be a component of the assisted living or a component of the long-term care. And so that's going to be a conversation that we have in the phase 2 as well, or kind of what could a memory care unit or a mix thereof look like. That's in keeping with best practices that we've seen really within the sector, where it's not necessarily a distinct carve out or an exclusive use to memory care as a facility, but rather memory care units within a larger continuum. So that is certainly on the table, and I apologize if it appeared that it wasn't, but that'll be a conversation that we have with stakeholders too, to see what is the opportunity for those memory care units. I don't think that's off the table yet. And Jennifer, I saw your hand as well.
Yeah.
Go. I believe, Jerry, you have your hand up. You wish.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just to add to Christina's comments. When while respectful of the idea that type of care is a component that really needs to be considered as part of the overall need in any kind of campus or care model, I just want to perhaps a cautionary note that the existing facility itself does not necessarily lend itself with its configuration to a proper memory care environment. There are certain factors that you have to take into place with dementia care and memory care that the existing infrastructure that's there would not make for an ideal setting for that. So it may be better suited to have that component in any form of the new build piece of the campus, because things such as dead end corridors, the inability to do full looping, walkarounds, things like that are things that really are not desirable to have dead end corridors for that type of care and model. So I would just suggest, points taken, that it's an important component, but that don't necessarily rely on the existing facility to be the piece that would fill that need as we go forward and look at design. That's all.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry. That's very helpful to hear.
Great comments. Ed, I believe I've seen your hand up. But did you want to make a comment?
Oh, I was just going to point out that Jerry has joined us and may have a comment, which he did. So that was great.
Yeah, I apologize. I was 10 minutes late to the party, but I'm here, so I've heard everything. So,
thank you.
Great.
Does the committee have any other questions of Christina's presentation?
Mr. Chair, Councillor Robinson and Councillor McQueen.
Okay, go ahead, Christine.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do want to say that for both presentations with regard to Rockwood Terrace and Grey Gables have been most detailed and most informative. And it is very good to be able to have the information as we're developing decisions, and then ultimately the decision with how we're moving along in campus of care or memory care with our long-term care communities. My question with regard to memory care and the building structure has been answered, so I very much appreciate that. I also wanted to just ask very quickly that if there is comments that have been received through the consultation process that may not exactly fit within the redevelopment of our sites, but are just that our stakeholders have had some consultation, how will that be addressed? By way of example, staff have mentioned or even other stakeholders, the challenges of crossing the road. Will that be addressed in a different context? Obviously, I'm not suggesting that it's within our mandate, and perhaps this is a question for our CAO. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, thanks, Councillor Robinson. And certainly that specific example that you provided with the crossing around across Highway 10 is something that transportation and planning are aware of, and something that we've had ongoing discussions through our transportation department. So yes, and when things like that come up, I hope that they plan to make sure that they're allocated appropriately to the right department for follow-up if that's not already happening. I don't want anything to fall through the cracks.
Well done. Thank you.
And I just might also add, from a process perspective for phase 2, one of the exercises that we'll be doing is a market sounding exercise. And so this will be an opportunity for us to take the concept plans that Jerry's team will be developing and actually test those out with stakeholders and flag what works, what doesn't, or what are the things that we need to consider. And so we document all of our focus groups and market soundings in that way, so we can pull together what that data looks like.
Thank you very much. I believe Deputy Warden, you had a comment, question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly going back to the part of the underground or the lower level of tenants, I know that there is going to be, or the thought at the time was the lower level of Grey Gables could have been doctors' offices, because when the new hospital was to come. Now the new hospital is coming. There may be a whole lot of dynamics that the lower level of Grey Gables and its true intention would be to support that campus hub, whether it's offices or supporting elements that are part of that campus of care. So just sort of for information, the other part on slide 8 that the warden had pulled out, it's interesting that the dynamics that have changed in the last 18 months with regards to housing cost and the Southern Georgian Bay region, how that has certainly changed in the sense of the price of housing and stuff. And I don't know if I know we're expecting a bit of a study back on the growth related part of that to the county. So maybe that's something that could be also be part of for information moving forward, and a number of things. And just going back for the space that's in that, I guess that's part of the job that's at hand here, is to try to figure out how best to make it all work in that campus of care to the space that is allotted. So look forward to that next phase, and thank you for both reports, very informative, and look forward to the second phase of this report as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Paul. Does the committee, any other questions on this report? Madam Clerk, I do not see any unless you do.
I do not, sir.
Okay, thank you. Madam CEO, I need to ask you a question. Did you, you indicated that we'd have a wholesome conversation on the county's true cost and how we put it together and so on. Did you want to have that this morning, or?
Certainly. I think when we get to other business, there are a few things that we can go over this morning, if that's okay, and we can say thank you to our guests.
Yes. So I'm wondering, is there, does the committee have any other questions of our guests here this morning? Seeing none, Madam Clerk. Again, thank you very much for the great presentations here this morning, and look forward to your next reports coming through. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you very much to everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Okay.
Now, Madam CEO, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. So I think we can begin in other business then with Joanna Alpiero from our finance department, and she's our deputy director, but she's also the lead on long-term care, as you know. And we had Joanna take a look at the Grey County specific numbers when it came to long-term care operating. Some of you may be aware that there's been some discussion on social media channels about whether or not numbers that are presented to committees or to council are A, consistent, or B, ever fully disclosed. And I really hope that anyone who has questions about that can come to staff, and if we need to have a staff report about things to confirm things that happened in the past, I'm more than happy to do that. I do struggle though with some of the questions that we're seeing online where there's a question of integrity, and I hope that this will help to ensure in this particular case that while there are varying opinions about what different numbers are, council was made aware of those and understands the differences and why they exist. So Joanna, I'll let you share your screen and you can talk council through our specifics. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Kim, and through you, Mr. Chair. So what I did was I started, just share my screen here. Can you see that?
Yes, that's good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so what I did was I started with page 18 of the Rockwood Terrace presentation that SHS just presented to us. And these were the costs that they presented in terms of the operating revenue and all the operating expenses. So what I did is I provided our actual Rockwood Terrace revenues and expenses as of December 31st, 2020. So these are our actuals. So now the county did have 2.9 million less in revenue. Now they had 128 beds and we have 102 beds. So the difference is understandable. However, when we get to the salaries, so we had almost 2.2 million more in salaries with 102 beds than SHS is predicting or anticipating for 128 beds. So there is that difference. And then we had some differences as well in other expenditures, but overall we had 1.9 million more in total operating expenses than SHS is anticipating. So if we were to project that out for 128 beds, the differences would be even higher. And if there's any questions or any further clarification people would like. One of the challenges, certainly for me, was understanding how and what they were including in these various numbers. The funding for long-term care can be very complex. And so for instance, the co-resident payments that they put in here would normally be deducted from the other accommodation envelope that we receive. I'm not sure that was done, or I'm not exactly sure how they calculated their revenues. I'm also not sure how they calculated their salaries and what wage rates they used. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. And if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Joanna. Maybe a question from the chair right at the start before I turn it over to the committee. I really have great concern over their cost per bed price. I think they're very low. And I'm just wondering, have you guys given that into any thought?
If I can, Joanna, do you want to stop sharing your screen just for a second?
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
No, it's fine. The challenges of Zoom and not being able to see people that you're talking to is very unnerving to me. I think I'll start off by saying that the scope of work and the discussion with SHS when we awarded this, the whole premise of this project was to get a sense of what was possible on this site and also on the Grey Gables site, but also to have some sense of what that was going to cost. And originally, they had come forward to us with an all-in number that was the whole campus of care. So the long-term care was in there, as well as the assisted living and affordable apartments, all in one number. And we asked them to split it out so that you could see the assisted living and the other parts of it independent of the long-term care. I think there may be more integrity or substance in those assisted living numbers. It said right now, there's still a lot of unknowns about that site, but it gets you at least a starting spot to know that if we wanted to take on the full campus of care development in Durham, that's a $100 million project. And then we'll look at where the numbers come in for Grey Gables. But really, that's all this is meant to do, was to try and at least have an initial conversation. We had a kickoff meeting with Colliers, our project manager, on May 31st. And we have a project planning workshop on June the 9th. In talking with Joanna and Mary Lou, our intent is, by the end of July, we need to have a conversation with council about numbers on these two projects and really lay it out for people within the context of everything else that the county already has on the books and what our 10-year capital and other things are telling us, so that we can make a decision. The next, the key milestone for Colliers is to retain the architect, and they want to do that by September. I think it's important that we get our head around good numbers before we retain an architect, so that we're sure what we're retaining an architect to do. So there are a few steps coming forward for us, and I think we'll continue to work away at those numbers. We hear two all the time. There's a per bed number that we hear quoted, and there's also a per square foot number that we hear quoted. And I think probably one of the things that we need to do is gather up all of these different sources of information and put them together so that we can kind of look at the different estimates, and council can then establish where they feel they're comfortable in all of that. So I hope that is helpful to you. You can see what a workshop with Colliers, an end of July finance discussion with council, and then developing a scope of work and retaining an architect in September.
Madam CEO, just a comment, I guess, or a question. This committee and county council has to look at a future plan. It's what we're basically trying to put in place by all this information. My big concern is when you see these first figures coming through and so on, how much can the county actually afford to physically proceed with is my big concern. And I find they're very quick figures and so on, and they'll change overnight. But that's my concern is, and the other concern is if we decide to go ahead to hire an architect to get this process going, which we have to, we are committed to a fee to that architect.
Yes.
And unless we can come up with some fantastic deal that, unless everything goes ahead, we don't pay you, but I've never seen an architect yet that is not paid. So there's some big cost concerns that I have that we have to really seriously think about. And it's just a comment.
No, I agree. And that's why I think it is important that we have those discussions before we enter into further agreements. And then want to change stream after all. I think we can have some really good discussions. And Mary Lou and Joanna are working towards that for us.
It's just if Joanna had a money tree somewhere, like these are all great, fantastic ideas, and it would be just great for Great County, but somewhere along the line, we have to really maybe take a deep breath and be real serious about what we can do and what we can't do, unless we don't want to plow any roads in Great County for the next 10 years, maybe.
Thank you.
Comments from the committee. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, which Brian? Which Brian?
Mr. O'Leary.
Okay.
Of course, I would be before you, Brian. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a couple of things that I wanted to talk about after the presenters were gone. And I guess it's a bit of a different thing that there's talk about Simcoe County. And I guess question for Kim, do you plan on either yourself or Jennifer to have a real good sit down conversation with Simcoe County and go over the things that they would have done differently when they did theirs, what happened to their contingency during their construction and those sort of things where we could maybe save or get away from the same mistakes. That was one point. The other thing is big picture money. When I looked at the numbers, my first thought, to be honest, was did we go far enough when we said we're going to put 1% of the levy towards long-term care? And because these numbers are crazy. So I guess that's part of of what you plan on doing and bringing to council, whether or not we have to go further than that with the decisions we're making, because the other thing is we don't want to be putting all our eggs in two baskets here. We have affordable housing problems everywhere. And, we have to take a long look at other places too. It's not just West Gray and Gray Gables, but so those are my thoughts. I'm just wondering if we shouldn't be thinking big picture more than 1% in what we originally said. And the last thing, just from what Joanna had said, Joanna, when you're talking about staff costs, is there any forecast that we have maybe through Jennifer? Like, we don't know what the government's going to do in terms of staffing for long-term care once COVID is out of the way.
Yeah.
Like, we have to expect some big changes in staffing. Like, there's something that's going to happen here. So when you're talking about the 2.2 million, I'm assuming it could very well be a lot more. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Go ahead, Mr. Millen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And of course, I would come after Mr. O'Leary to clean up the mess. In regard to Kim's earlier comments around, staff integrity, I have never had any concern about any numbers I have got from county staff or lower tier staff for that matter. Never. I cannot say that about consulting companies. Now, I'm not calling anybody a liar here, but I have never felt very comfortable as I have around county staff reports and numbers. I used to have a high school principal that used to say that there are fringe idiots in the community. And to say that they're all on social media would not be fair, but there are some of them. Anyway, more to the point, I do believe, as Kim and I think Mr. O'Leary indicated, we do need to have a real good, serious conversation with county council and with the community about what can we afford. I know what we need to do, and we just heard that in the last hour or so. That's what we need to do. But can we afford it, and what are the options? Because something's going to fall off the plate to put this on the plate. It can't all happen at the same time. Although that said, maybe it is, as Mr. O'Leary said, maybe it's time to think big. Maybe we do take on this huge project, and it's a project for generations. I don't know. The numbers scare me. I'm not sure our ratepayers can withstand this after what we've gone through in the last 15 or 16 months. But it's not going to be easy, that's for sure. But if it was easy, everybody would do it. So let's carry on. I have great faith in our staff in front of us here to help us through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I can't say that you done anything better when Mr. O'Leary did, because I think his comments were great. I'm wondering, my big concern is the question always comes in the back of my mind. Next year is election year. What point, is there any point along this process we're going through that the election year could impact our decision?
If I may, there are certain, once we get through the project planning workshop, I think we'll have a better sense of the various decision points and timelines that are in front of us. And I think we need to line those up against the calendar, because we have both a provincial as well as a municipal election. And we want to make sure that we're all understanding decisions that need to be made, when they need to be made, and kind of the windows in which how those will overlay against those various election timelines, and the ability of either the province or yourselves to make decisions. So we are going to at least look at that aspect of it clearly. I think the point was just raised about whether or not there's some further public consultation once we have more information. Do we need to think about, communication and discussion in the community for some or all of this? Maybe that can be part of our finance discussion in July as well. It's a big decision and a really, really important decision. And I'm so glad to hear you all speaking this way. I think we don't want to rush it. On the other hand, when it comes to Rockwood Terrace redevelopment is the one thing that has a really specific and hard deadline. That said, we don't have signed development agreements for either project. And so that's an important next step with the province. So perhaps there's some further discussion that can happen there as well.
Thank you, Kim. Councillor Leary, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I had one more circled here that I didn't bring up. Just another comment. When you're talking about big money and what it does to your decision-making process, there was 2 comments made today, one by Scott Mackey on covered parking and by Mr. Warden on dementia. 2 things that are very important. One of the things, if you're just talking about Rockwood Terrace, one of the things you want is to have a facility where people want to come to. And if you're a senior and you're looking at covered parking, that's a big deal in terms of making the decision to go there. And it took us a matter of seconds to dismiss that because of costs. And those are the things that happen when you're talking about money that, 15 years down the road, you're going to say, what were they thinking? They should have had covered parking. These are for seniors. So those are the kind of decisions that, you end up making bad decisions because of money. And it will kill us in the long run. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Excuse me. Committee, you got any other comments?
Councillor Robinson and Councillor McQueen and Warden Hicks.
Okay, go ahead, Christine.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate the discussion that we're having here. What I'd like to say is that we're making decisions that are going to be important for our current Grey County residents, but also our future residents who will be residing in this community. I do appreciate all of the financial data that we've been receiving and the presentation in the charts. Well, one of the things that I think would be really important, if the committee is so interested in, is to break it down in terms of priority. For Rockwood Terrace, we have the hard date of 2025. So what is the cost associated with the redevelopment of the Rockwood Terrace long-term care home that we need to deal with now within our financial decision-making and construction decision-making, and then any other priority decisions that need to be made. And if that could be matched up with the financial costs and any other next steps, and then our outreach or expand out to development of buildings, I guess 3, 4, and 5, and what that financial obligation, recognizing we're seeing that material or that information now, but it's just to perhaps present it in a way or package it in a way that we can see our immediate costs or those future costs. And I do agree there should be consideration with regard to levy considerations. And I would say that my comments are also to be considered for the Grey Gables development. So I'm just wondering if staff feel that is worthwhile, not to add additional work, but is that something that may be more of a tool that we can use? And also it would be clear for our citizens. And also, I guess, for our task force here and council. So thank you. Looking for comments back.
Madam CEO.
If I may, if I'm understanding Councillor Robinson, perhaps looking at this a little bit more on a cash flow basis, these are the commitments that we would need to make to enable required things like the site servicing. The Durham property is a greenfield essentially, and there's a lot of work that has to go into doing that. And just by the layout of it, you're extending those services really to the boundary of the area to be developed, and then you're kind of working your way back towards the main and current location as well. but certainly we can look at that and cash flow it. I think there are some additional questions about, there was discussion today about the CMHC funding. They talk about the provincial contribution to the long-term care redevelopment. I know that the members of this committee are aware that the county front ends all of the costs of redeveloping long-term care, and then the province pays us back over the 25 years. So, you know, there are questions, Mary Lou and Joanna and I have had some discussion, you know, just discussions about how to debenture things and how many debentures you have and when you take those debentures. And, you know, the county has some funds set aside. When's the appropriate time to draw down those funds? And, you know, lots of different things. So we have a lot of scenarios to work through. We'll do our best to put together a package that will enable a good discussion with everybody. But, you know, if we need to take a couple of goes at this, we're more than happy to do so. I think there's a lot of learning for everybody in all of this.
Okay, follow up, Christine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for recognizing me for that follow-up. Yes, Kim, that's fantastic. I'm looking for what are our immediate obligations. So it's the redevelopment of the Rockwood Terrace community, or the Rockwood Terrace long-term care home. And so that's the priority at hand, the costs associated with that. And as we move, should council decide the campus of care is the way to go, it'll be supported future. There's a great attraction for individuals coming to Grey County and for wanting to live in this campus of care. And then what's the breakdown of costs for future? So we've got a costing that we need to incur to have that Rockwood Terrace redevelopment take place, basically all the way to a ribbon cutting. And then the phases after that in terms of the other buildings. So it's really the commitment at hand that we're looking at is what I was considering. And thank you, Madam CAO, for your comments.
Thank you, Christine. Your questions, some can be answered at this time, but there's a lot of the questions that unless we can see in the future, it's impossible to actually put cost on, but I understand what you're saying.
Just to be prepared. Thank you.
Deputy Warden McQueen, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess a couple things is it's a lot of times it's referred to an investment in our communities and an investment in Grey County. I look at the two operating and expense sheets, both from the campus of care and the long-term care. And looking at their spreadsheet, it's in the positive note. I know right now it's costing us over $3 million a year to run our 3 homes. And I think that was one of the reasons we were looking at the campus of care, of trying to, you know, we talk about our taxpayers and all that, is to look at a balanced approach that sort of offsets that cost of the just initial long-term care. And that's part of the modeling that we found from Simcoe County, is that's how they offset that cost. So looking at slide, I'm just looking here on the operating revenue with regards to, I'm just looking at where is the, it must be page 18. With regards to the operating revenue and expenses of the campus of care, they show an operating profit of 144,000. Certainly there's a lot of dynamics in that, all those numbers, and we know it's very preliminary at this time. But I know on the sense, even on the revenue side, the cost of housing and everything's going up. You know, it's going to drive up the revenue on rentals too, because it can't. That balance it just seems it has to drive it. We talk about the cost of building, but it's certainly the cost of housing is continuing to rise. And then if we go to the just on the projected revenue and expenses for long-term care, it shows in that spreadsheet of an operating profit of 724,000. So you know, I know it's big numbers, as has mentioned a few other committee members, but you know, is it paying itself back, and is it revenue neutral, or is it creating a revenue stream? So, it's always been, our biggest issue is been over the years of long-term care is how much it's costing us as a county. So it's a bigger picture. It's a bigger direction that we are considering of going. And certainly, again, as Councillor Robinson said, it's not just as of today, but it's for the future. And we have to look at the investment of future years of Grey County, and like every council in the past have had, certain times in their political junction where they've had to make some decisions, and those decisions are something that move into the future. So certainly I think it's preliminary at this time, but looking at those spreadsheets in the black is certainly, I think, a positive thing to look at as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Warden, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got to tell you, I'm still very much dealing with the sticker shock, and I have to say I'm quite uncomfortable. Maybe I'm just not being as visionary as I need to be, and that may very well be true. But it strikes me that maybe, and we should have a good discussion about this, perhaps, maybe we're just taking on too much all at once. I'm definitely in the camp of Councillor Robinson. We know that Rockwood needs to happen. That's our priority. So maybe the discussion needs to be that we focus on what we need to do. And it's nice to have these global figures for other ideas and future thoughts. But for right now, we've got a lot on our plate. I'm really concerned about our ability to address other priorities that need to be addressed if we're thinking as a visionary council. The public has made clear to us some other priorities. This really scares me, and this tells me that we might not be able to do some of the other things that we want to do. For me, and this is just me personally speaking, if we're going to be big and bold, I want to be big and bold on affordable housing. And seniors affordable housing is a part of that, but affordable housing generally, that's where I want to be big and bold. I'm concerned about our ability to address other priorities given this. Maybe it's just the initial shock of these figures, but I'm uncomfortable. I'm not in a comfortable place right now. I would love to hear how other people are feeling. I'm just putting that out there. I'm not in a comfortable place, and I wonder if we really shouldn't be giving some serious thought to what Councillor Robinson seems to be directing us to, which is, what are the absolute priorities? Should we focus on getting those things done, and perhaps table some of the other discussions for another time once we get the ball rolling on the things that we absolutely must do. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Excellent comments. One thing that Grey County is very good at is planning for the future. The Rockwood Terrace development, yes, it is a must, but there's things like, for instance, on a planning side, we're looking maybe at a future campus of care on that site. So you need to bring in the proper sewage pipe size, proper water size, gas, and everything else. So it all, we have to look at the future to bring that in. It'd be silly to bring in a small sewage pipe, not have it big enough for future growth, and just have to spill it out of the ground because we couldn't put it away. But it's just, those are the kind of visions and the way we're thinking right now. And we don't lose track of that. But anyway, it's just a comment.
Agreed.
Does committee have any other comments? Go ahead, Christine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly enjoying the discussion, and I'll just lower my hand because it's kind of distracting there. So I'm not suggesting tabling any of the projects. I think they're all worthy, and they're worthy to our Grey County residents, most definitely. But I am suggesting that we need to be, and I use the term all the time, and it doesn't wear out, and that is future ready. We need to respond to the needs of our Grey County residents currently, and there are needs, and certainly there are needs in long-term care and long-term care community, and also to project that to the future for the long-term care needs. So that's where I'm coming from. But in our discussions, we prioritize what is that we need to address, pay for now, and as we save and continue with the different phases, just putting the project in really priority sense for everyone. So thank you. That's just a comment I wanted to make.
Thank you, Christine. Madam CEO, any comments?
If I may, and I'm Councillor Mackey, I know has another comment as well, but to be clear, we're going to do our very, very best to break down all of these numbers. But I think what we heard today from what Joanna shared and what we heard from the consultants is that the redevelopment will require an injection of capital and an ongoing financial commitment by Grey County to make it viable. And I think one of the things that we did, Jennifer and I did have a discussion with Jane Sinclair from Simcoe County, and tried to understand the project that they put through and what worked well and what didn't. I think the challenge that we're really facing right now is that some of those economic fundamentals have changed so much. The cost of housing has gone up, 40% in just this year. People's incomes have not. So that gap between those two things has increased by a huge amount. And so, the fundamentals are different than when Simcoe undertook their project. We can learn from it, but it's not going to be a straight line comparison. So we'll work really hard to pull together the best numbers that we can to help all of you think your way through this. There are some things, though, that we don't know. There are always new programs. We aren't the only place on the planet that's facing these issues. So I think we can expect that over time, maybe there'll be adjustments in revenue streams and that we can look to in the future that might help us make a different decision in the future when more funds became available. There was something else there too, but I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Before I go to Councillor Mackey, I'm just wondering, Madam CEO and the Treasury Department, I assume you are looking at the financial needs of all of Grey County for the next 5-10 years, not just necessarily long-term care and housing. There's many other needs throughout the municipality that we'll have to look at, and I assume you take that all in the same bucket at the same time.
That's right. And Mary Lou, do you want to make any comments? But I think that's entirely for when we think about what our long-term capital requirements are, your asset management requirements, that sort of thing. All of those things have to come into play. We really do need to look at the overall financial picture of the county. Mary Lou, did you?
Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank committee for their comments. There's a lot of good discussion and some good takeaways for staff. You're not the only one with sticker shock, Mr. Warden. We have a lot of priorities, and to commit the future generations to this much money, and without taking the time to consider how this will, I'm trying to think of the right word here, how this will formulate what other opportunities are left for the other departments and the other competing priorities is something we need to take a long and hard look at, as well as, how much this hinders our ability to borrow in the future, and to make sure that we make the right decision at the right time. So there's a lot of interesting things here, and I think it would be helpful for staff as far as Councillor Robinson's comment about breaking down into priorities, that if we're looking at, what are our first priorities? And to speak to Councillor Burley, we listened to an OLTCA webinar yesterday where a for-profit is redeveloping, and they gave a price per bed for Northern Ontario that had just closed within the last month. And the developer, he indicated they're a for-profit, private, doing a lot of development. And his comment was aligned with yours, that he believes that the prices we're seeing will be the new norm. So there's a lot of things to consider.
Good comment.
So Joanna and I have some work cut out for ourselves in conjunction with Jen and Kim.
I remembered my other point too, Mr. Chair, which was about things like ambulatory care that are really outside of the county's area of expertise. I don't know how that's funded. And it may be, and that'll be part of the work that's happening in phase 2 with Tristina and SHS. So there are some other numbers coming forward that that may, really provide a very positive part to this. We just don't have those yet.
Thank you, Kim. Councillor Mackey, go ahead. You've been waiting a little while.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I do really appreciate, all the comments. And as everyone is aware, I've been a huge proponent of campus of care. We may not be able to do it all at once, but, I really appreciate, council's decisions in purchasing 32 acres down in Durham, because it allows us to potentially grow. We're going to create a long-term care facility. The campus of care may be an add-on, years to come if we can't afford it right now. But at least we've thought ahead about having that ability. So, I like the way that we're thinking right now. What we can afford to do, certainly Joanna and Mary Lou will certainly help us with that. But, what's always intrigued me, from the presentations I've seen from Simcoe County is how the other avenues, helped offset the costs of long-term care. We've always heard the costs of long-term care are high in our county operated homes. One, they're high, but they do a wonderful job, and this last pandemic proved how great, our county run homes were. So, the money that we're spending is money well spent, in my opinion. So don't lose sight of that. But, as we move forward, I agree with Christine. We have the priorities right now around the rebuilds of our long-term care. What we can do in addition to that will be dictated by the amount of money that we have. But at least we're positioning ourselves to be able to do that, and for future councils to be able to do that. So those are my primary comments. I do think there's other revenue streams that probably need to be looked at. I know at the hospital, they have a pharmacy that creates money for the hospital. If we have long-term care facilities, and additional, possible beds, having an in-house pharmacy is something we may want to look at. Because, if Markdale doesn't have a pharmacy, that's maybe an opportunity. So I just throw that out, that there may be other revenue generating opportunities that could be looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Does the committee, any other comments?
Yes, I see Councillor McQueen, Warden Hicks, and Councillor O'Leary.
Okay, go ahead. Deputy Warden McQueen, go ahead.
That's okay. Just call me Paul if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of good conversations here, but I think we also have to look at right now, the cost of money is very cheap. That could change in the future years to come. And so there's a lot of different dynamics. And obviously the cost of cheap money is probably one of the reasons what's driving up housing prices as well. But, there's a lot of, this is very preliminary and I just, talking about, you're talking about, just mentioned about priorities and that sort of thing. As far as the extending beds for Grey Gables, I think there's a time frame around that as well. So there's a lot of dynamics that that come with that expansion. And I think part of the idea was expanding that whole model was to make it more efficient as well. By saying that, you know, for an example, on the modeling for Rockwood Terrace, it says, you know, there's no value in the current facility, you know, and it's going to cost you $250,000 to knock it down. Well, is there a possibility that we carve it off that site and we sell it and we save ourselves $250,000 and we sell it to somebody else for $250,000? So we're $500,000 ahead. Somebody else redevelops it through affordable housing or however. Not only are you creating a housing or maybe solving a housing problem, but you're also creating another taxation that goes into not only the municipality of West Grey, but Grey County. So I think you have to look at that part. I know maybe it makes it look like a perfect subdivision and all the new houses, but I'm just saying is there's a lot of choices and options I think is there, you know, from that part. And I think we need to get an opinion on that current building. Is there value in that building by just selling it off to somebody else and allowing others? I know there's been a lot of hospitals that have been sold off or repurposed for some other company to make that investment, not Grey County. I mean, if it doesn't, the modeling doesn't make sense for Grey County to do it. But I'm just saying, I would like to see that option also. Is what would that look like? Because as Councillor Millen says, 250,000 may be a little shy on what it would cost to get rid of that building. And as far as repurposing that building, I don't know. It's probably a lot of concrete and brick and stone and, you know, a lot of other stuff. So I don't know in the sense of what that would look like. But again, there's a lot of different options, I think, in this. And the bottom line is you know, the model that they're looking at is something that's going to pay itself back. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Good comments. Mr. Warden, I believe you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. One, this is a really good discussion, and it brings me back to one of the comments made by our CAO about some social media commentators criticizing the integrity and transparency of this body and this process. I think this open discussion kind of flies in the face of some of those comments, particularly by, disappointingly, some former county council members, which I'm quite disappointed about. But in any case, I move on. I want to say that I echo the remarks made by Councillor Mackey. I really, he's helping me to get some perspective. Mr. Chairman, you too, when you talk about, you know, we need to think about the future, and it's a real shame if you develop and put in only for right now when we know we may want to do certain things in the future. So when we're putting in some of that infrastructure, it would be good to contemplate future prospects. The deputy warden, I think, mentioned previously current costs, and I think he was using figures of 2 or 3 million. And I just want to clarify and make sure that we're all well aware that it's about double that. It was 6.1 million during my first term as warden, and today it's about 7 million. If I'm wrong about that, Mary Lou will correct me, I'm certain. But I just want to be clear that currently we're spending county dollars about $7 million a year in support of long-term care.
Any comments, Mary Lou?
Or Joanna?
I can jump in there. It was so in 2021, sorry, and through you, Mr. Chair, in 2021, the levy for long-term care operating capital was just under 7.5 million.
Wow. Thank you for that. I believe, I don't want to get into trouble here. I believe it was Councillor O'Leary next.
And then Councillor Robinson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm almost finding a little bit of humor in this. We have Paul at the extreme, looks like he'll do anything to get this done, all the way to Buck, who is being very, very cautious, and then Christine in the middle going, you know, let's just focus on what we need to get done. And that's how big this conversation is. Like it's huge. But I just wanted to mention, like, this is going to be, regardless of how we think, it's going to be up to staff to come back and say, you know, if you want to do the campus of care, this is what you're going to have to do. And we don't know what that is yet, or whether we're willing to do that. And so I think we have to wait on that. And hopefully it's not too bad, but the best thing I've heard so far is, I think it was Mary Lou was talking about priorities. That's the biggest thing here. You know, we only, to my, I'm pretty sure we only have one crisis, maybe two. The housing crisis is, you know, we've already started to deal with it, but it's a crisis and it has to be up there in our priorities. And just to throw into the mix there, we've also got an opioid crisis that we haven't even started to deal with. And we will have to deal with that as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Christine, go ahead.
Thank you. And very quickly, Mr. Warden, signed development agreement. How close are we? What else do we need to do to facilitate that? Just looking for a comment back. Thank you.
Madam CEO, are you able to answer that?
It's really in the hands of the province. There are a number of things that we needed to have in place, like the property, and that for the Rockwood thing. So that has taken a little bit of time, but certainly that's where we are now. They were also very conscious of the fact that we needed to have a project manager in place. And so that's there now. One of the things that is part of that development agreement is that project plan and the timelines. The province wants to know what your plans are going forward, and what those milestones and the associated dates are with those. So that's the piece of work that we're going to be doing with Colliers in the next little while, and then that will go forward from there. The other thing that we had a conversation earlier this week. You'll recall that there was a licensing discussion with around the Durham property at the time, and they do their public consultation, and we did get confirmation back that had been awarded, and so that aspect of things for the Rockwood Terrace project was complete. We know that they had initiated that same licensing review project for Grey Gables, and I don't have the letter back from the province confirming that was all complete. I don't anticipate there's any issues. It's just another piece of work, and I think they've been a bit busy there. So we'll give them the benefit that that's going to come along very shortly too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. I got to thank all the committee members and staff. We've had a great conversation here this morning. The time is going. We could probably spend a whole day and probably tomorrow discussing this matter, but I think we have had a great discussion, and I think maybe the time has come to part company for a little while. So unless we have any other new business, and then seeing none, I think maybe I'll ask for a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Millen, second by Deputy Mayor McQueen. All in favor? Raise your hand. Thank you, everybody. A great discussion.
Everyone.
Thanks.
Good
Thank you,
day,
everybody.
Thank goodness for rain.